Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Jones. Welcome to interCHANGE. Thank you so very much for joining us. We've got lots to talk about today. Interesting stuff. This horrible shooting in Arizona and all the discussion afterwards about who exactly is to blame. We'll talk about the new proposal for a law which would require you to show a picture ID before you are allowed to vote in Wisconsin. We'll talk about the race to replace Scott Walker for Milwaukee County Executive. And we'll talk about the Packers' big game against Atlanta. Okay, joining us tonight, our newspaper columnist, Joel McNally. Longtime State Senate Republican aide and oftentimes a fill-in host at WISN Radio, Kevin Fischer. Denise Callaway, the coordinator of business and community partnerships for the Milwaukee Public School System. And Gerard Randall, consultant and local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, let's talk first about the shooting rampage in Arizona. There has been so much talk all week long, not only about the mentally ill nut job who did the shooting, but about whether the polarizing political talk in this country contributes to making this kind of thing happen. I don't know if you can blame anyone but the guy who pulled the trigger, Gerard.
I absolutely agree. I think he was unhinged. I don't see anything much more than a loose connection, and I think as the story unfolds and more evidence comes out as to what his motivations may have been, and frankly, even taking his word for what motivations may have been, there would be a lot of lack of credibility. I do believe that what has started as a result is a helpful conversation about political discourse in this country, but I don't see the connection between the two events. And I don't think that any further revelations are going to point out connections. I thought what was interesting was one of the judges that is in Arizona told the sheriff to quit making pronouncements about what he thought the motivations were behind the shootings and the deaths, because he was ruining the case against the person that they've apprehended. And what will ultimately come out in all of this, I think, will be more credible information as to what may have led to these horrendous acts taking place.
Denise, do you see how anybody can draw the connection between Rush Limbaugh, shooter, Sarah Palin, shooter?
Well, I don't know that anybody can draw a direct connection to either of those two individuals, but, you know, I think we have to realize that we're talking about someone who clearly is mentally unbalanced. So we can't discount the fact that rhetoric spoken as fact can have on an individual who's doesn't have a good grasp on reality. So I do think that, you know, this is an example of how we have to be cautious about what we do say and the words that we do use, because we don't know how they might influence individuals who are not mentally balanced. I do think that if we have a discussion and begin to have a discussion for more than 1 or 2 days in this country about how we have to be careful about what we say and the impact that it can have, I think that that's a good road for us to travel down. I'm concerned within a few days after the shooting had happened, some politicians were out kind of defending themselves and using language that inflamed again to try to say, I'm not to blame for this, and don't say that I am, because if you are, you're using, I won't use the term because it's a very offensive term to individuals who are Jewish. So I think, you know, in this country, we have to stop and take a look about what are we about. Are we about governing for the good of the people, or are we about scoring political points for our different parties and points of view? If we're about scoring political points for our parties and different points of view, in a week we're going to be right back to where we were, which is not a good road when it comes to governing and doing the people's business.
You know, but polarizing language between the two sides has been around forever.
It's been around forever, but we're talking different here. We really are. And when everyone says, well, everybody does it, and, you know, Democrats have said stupid things about Republicans, and Republicans have said stupid things about Democrats, that's all true. But honestly, there is an organized political movement in this country based on hate. There is. And it is no coincidence that after an African-American president was elected, the 2 years after that, we have had a rise of very public right-wing hate. and the language has gotten more violent. There were people showing up at some of their rallies carrying guns, and the Republican Party condoned it, basically, because the Tea Parties were in their camp and they were attacking the president, and they were holding up, pictures of him being a witch doctor and things like that and attacking him. And so the Republicans were very happy to have any kind of ugly support they could get. And it worked for them in the 2010 election. There's no question about that. But when you mentioned one of the principal politicians involved here that put gun sights over congressional districts, including Gabrielle Giffords' congressional district. Gabrielle Giffords herself was very uncomfortable with that, spoke out publicly saying there are consequences to doing things like this, putting a gun sight over my district. This is a district. Everyone's talked about what a wonderful woman this was and how moderate and not radical, and she's in favor of gun rights and all that, but how she got along with Republicans and Democrats. Well, a brick went through her office window in Tucson after she voted for health care reform, as if there were some kind of un-American act. And when Republicans didn't speak out against this stuff, and there are other examples of examples of hate against gays that was used in the argument against repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, hate against Latinos that has been used in the immigration argument to block anything to allow 12 to 14 million people living and working in this country.
But I think to be fair, though, you have to say, Kevin, you never saw
you're
a
gonna
president,
have Kevin say?
But you never saw a president as vilified verbally as George Bush was.
They burned him. They burned him. They hung him.
That is simply not true. The death threats against this president in office right now have soared since he's been in office. Do not claim that the left did anything like threatening the life of the president the way the right has of this president.
They burned him. They hung him in effigy. You had entertainers and other pundits ask for the president to be murdered. They asked for Vice President Cheney to be assassinated. There was a movie made about the assassination of the president. And we don't have time to talk about the vitriolic hate speech that's been leveled by liberals and Democrats in this country. You want to show me one thing a Republican said? I can raise you that by 5 or 10. Both sides have done it. And this isn't about Sarah Palin, the Tea Party movement, which you just disparaged, and you don't even know Tea Party people.
Sure I did.
Grandmas, grandpas, people in wheelchairs.
We're talking haters.
Parents, no. This isn't about the Tea Party and Rush Limbaugh and conservative talk radio and conservative talk television. It's about a single, lone, deranged, drugged-up gunman, a nut job, who did this. And to try to be ideological ambulance chasers and ghoulishly try to exploit this tragedy to make political points is wrong. We should not back down on our political speech. We have used metaphors that have been aggressive since the beginning of campaigns to suggest that metaphors and speech killed people and did these shootings and was responsible for this tragedy in Tucson. It makes the people who make that claim look just as ridiculously crazy as Mr. Lofter.
Let me just say something first about mental illness. One of the ways that the Republicans have tried to divert what they've done has been to name call and attack this mentally ill man. The sad truth is, in Arizona, they have slashed funds for treating mental illness, just like we're probably about to do in this state. Most people with mental illness are not violent nut jobs and dangerous people. But when you attack the mentally ill by calling them names, that really is just extending the hate that we're talking about.
If you care to listen, I said he was a single, lone, deranged gunman.
The problem we have in this country is that we don't listen to each other anymore. Right, left doesn't make any difference. The problem we have in this country is that it's not enough to simply say your opponent is wrong. You have to find a way to vilify them, belittle them, and score points that are going to get you either a passing mention on whatever political pundits, talk show you want to be. This is not, and in this country, if we do not decide that this is not about the left, the right, who's right or who's wrong, but about how we govern this country in a way that people expect us to do it, we're going to continue to have these issues and these problems occur.
Well, you don't.
Because all we're doing, all we do is inflame.
You don't whittle away at a person's free speech.
It's a difference between free speech and being appropriate in terms of disagreeing with somebody.
Yeah,
That's it.
The fact you can say something doesn't mean you should.
Realize that too.
We move on to the next.
I didn't say
We move on to the
anybody
next
was
topic.
not
Republican
guilty,
state
but we all
legislators
are.
promised to push through a voter ID bill in Wisconsin and then go even further and change the Constitution so that Democrats in the future would have an extremely hard time ever trying to change it back. I think this will be considered yet another victory for the Scott Walker agenda.
The voter ID bill is something that Republicans have pushed for a number of years. It will pass. I support it. I think it speaks to ensuring the integrity of the vote. There are a number of safeguards that are in there to ensure that those who don't have some type of identification that's state issued can get one, often at no cost. So I would like to see the focus now put on how do we get those folk to those centers so that they can get the appropriate IDs and exercise their right to vote. The constitutional amendment, I wouldn't personally have pushed it that far because I don't think it's necessary.
I think it's just talk right now. I think the photo ID, it's a moot point. It's going to come to fruition. It's just a matter of when, and I think the sooner the better. Try to get that in place for the April elections when you won't have as big a turnout. If there are problems, they can be fixed, they can be tweaked, they can be repaired, so that you have this common sense measure in place by the 2012 presidential election to avoid any possible problem. But it's going to happen, and I think it is on the fast track. You hold your hearings, you let the opposition speak, you hold your votes, and the governor signs it into law, and let's get poll workers want it. Poll workers in hearings that were held around the state a few years ago, they said they want this measure in place. Get them trained. I don't think it'll be that difficult for them to learn how to use photo ID at the polls. And then what's the problem? You have to prove who you say you are. Just like if you go and pick up a video tonight at Blockbuster. There's no problem. And I'll go this far. There will be legislation to, if you cannot afford a state-issued ID, the state will give one to you.
I've always been surprised that anybody was against this.
Picking up a video is not a constitutional right. Voting is. And the fact of the matter is the phony claims of vote fraud the Republicans have leveled have been investigated by a U.S. attorney who's a Republican, a district attorney who's a Democrat. They always find that there's no evidence.
Why is this difficult for anybody?
No, they've never.
Because
they had numbers.
Well, let me tell you who it's difficult for. Let me tell you who it's difficult for. It's difficult for the people who don't have photo IDs. Let me think. African Americans, Latinos, the elderly, and students.
Well, yeah, Gerard and I, we don't want minorities to vote.
So then they have to go out and get one.
They have to get one.
Yeah, you have to go out and buy something in order to exercise your constitutional right. That's absolutely right. That's part of what you have to do. The other, yes, you're right, it's going to pass because Scott Walker won and the Republicans control both houses of the legislature, and they want to make it as difficult as possible for Democrats to vote. No doubt about that.
The voters
the other thing I want to say, the next step.
We're not allowed to interrupt.
The next step, of course, is to get rid of same-day registration.
Yes.
And that cannot be argued in any sense that that's necessary. You know what same-day registration is? It is protection for every one of us on this panel. People have repeatedly told us that they've gone to the polls, they've voted for years, and for some reason their name isn't on the voter registration list.
It's happened to me.
And the fact that you can register same day saves all of us because of bureaucratic error which removes names from the list that shouldn't be removed.
I have no problem with same day registration
Yeah,
as long as you have
but
a photo
Republicans
ID.
do because they want to make it harder for
Because you shouldn't
Democrats
be able to show
vote.
up with a cable bill and say, I'm this person and be allowed to vote.
You know, I think what we have to do is take a look at this being what it is. It's the fulfilling of a campaign promise that really is addressing an issue that we have not seen to be a major issue in this state. I mean, let's just call it what it is, and that's fine. And the Republicans are going to pass it, that's fine. They have every right to do that, they're in power. But we need to make sure that people are not disenfranchised because of this new law that's going to take place. And we need to make sure that there is every safeguard that needs to be in place, plus more on top of that to make sure that that doesn't happen. I'll be very interested to see, once we take a look at what our election results look like back in the last presidential election in terms of precincts where people would tend to have difficulty in not having these IDs. What do those numbers look like in 2008? What do those numbers look like in 2012? I can tell you right now, we're going to find that fewer people are voting. I think that anything that disenfranchises citizens who have the legal right to vote without unnecessary barriers being put in place is bad government.
That hasn't happened.
This is not a disenfranchisement.
I'm not talking about other states, Kevin. I'm talking about here.
Those who are legitimate voters, who have the legitimate right to vote. This is a safeguard to make sure that your one vote is cast and that anyone else who doesn't have the right to vote doesn't cast a vote. I'm not seeing why there's all of the angst about getting an ID card when there are so many other instances where ID card is necessary, whether you go to cash a check or whether you go to make application for a job. Oftentimes, you need to have a state.
Jim Causey wrote in the Journal Sentinel when he posed as a homeless person that you needed a state ID to get into a homeless shelter.
You know, I don't, it's not my constitutional right to be able to cash a check. It's not my constitutional right to apply for a job. It is my constitutional right to be able and to be allowed to vote. And this law is going to make it more difficult.
We need to encourage more people to vote, not make it more difficult for people
more honest people to vote. Absolutely.
Who's dishonest? Are you calling dishonest?
People who commit voter fraud.
Which people are those?
Oh,
there's plenty, Joel.
No, they're not. Effort that includes getting
not.
people to those centers so that they get their ID cards and exercise their
I voted for the state in 30 years. I never felt that because I didn't have a voter ID or the person next to me didn't have a voter ID, that somehow my vote was diluted.
All right, we have to talk for just a few minutes about the race to replace Milwaukee County Executive Scott Walker, who is now governor. In less than 5 weeks, voters will choose someone to replace Walker, and the top two guys then will face off in a general election. So you have Lee Holloway, Jeff Stone, Chris Abele, Jim Sullivan, and the kind of kooky woman who wants to be referred to as not the white man's bitch. So who's going to win this thing? I think right now, I think the premature talk that Abele, because he has all this money, is going to win, I think that's very premature.
But no, I'll be honest, I have a real hard time with this campaign as far as handicapping it. Chris Abele has a lot of his own money, i.e. Ron Johnson, but the difference there, Ron Johnson had a lot of time to forge a campaign, talk about issues, talk about his platform and policies. You have a very short turnaround here, and I don't know why Chris Abele, if he's going to be able to explain his motivation, number one, of getting in, and his policies and platform and issues. The only certainty I see is that the only conservative in the race benefits because he is the only conservative in the race, and that's Jeff Stone. So I think he gets past the primary. As far as the other Democrats, Lee Holloway, every time he opens his mouth, he sticks his foot in it. The Journal Sentinel is reporting, his baggage each and every day. Abele's money, I don't know in the short term how that helps. And Sullivan may not have recovered yet or has enough in the bank after his tough run against Leah Vukmir in the state Senate.
But if being a conservative was such a positive, how come Walker lost Milwaukee County in the governor's race?
This is going to hinge on who has the strongest constituency that gets out in the primaries. And I agree, Chris Abele doesn't have that constituency. Ron Johnson was able to win because at least he had the Republican Party and all of its machinery to get out the vote on his behalf. In this case, I think you're going to see Lee Holloway and Jeff Stone make it into the primary as the top two, because they will be able to motivate their base.
Somebody better tell Lee Holloway, PR 101.
Well,
you know what? The truth of the matter is, to me, the only way Lee Holloway can get past the primary is if the Journal Sentinel helps elect him by attacking him every day.
By bringing up the fact that he's a slum landlord?
In the black community, Lee Holloway does not have as much support as you believe. There are a lot of people uncomfortable with his personality, his way of treating people, and his experience as a landlord. But if the Journal Sentinel attacks him every day, there will be a
backlash.
Closing ranks. This man is being attacked the way no other candidate is because he's a black man, and the black community may well vote for a man who is not maybe one of their strongest candidates. I don't quite know what to make of Chris Abele with the money. I know he's a very bright guy. He would not be getting in this race if he didn't want to win it and run Milwaukee County with some new ideas. And he's got some money. He's got some money to put out there what they are before the election. I think that's going to be strong. Sullivan and Stone, frankly, I don't think either one of them are very strong candidates. You say Jeff Stone is the only conservative candidate, but he's sort of he's sort of like, you know, Scott Walker's philosophy without the personality or political charm.
But that helps. The Scott Walker people will vote for him.
No, it doesn't.
Well,
and so
primary, it'll make a difference.
Yeah, I'm of the opinion that Abele is getting into this race because he wants to run for a bigger office, and he doesn't even care if he wins this race.
If he doesn't win it, he won't be able to run for a bigger office.
There, though. He'll get all this name recognition. So when Cole steps down, Abele can get in that race.
I'm not sure about that. I think there might be some of that kind of testing the waters with this, but I think what's really going to make a difference in terms of who's going to be able to come to the primary, you've got such a short period of time here.
It's a couple of weeks.
Who has the best campaign machine where they're able to get out the vote? Because, you know, there's not a lot of voter interest in this election. There simply
Abele
is not.
might have that because he's going to have that Barrett connection.
He will have the Barrett connection, so I think that's going to be
He won't
helpful
have
to him.
unions behind
But
him.
I think the unions are going to be key, and that's why I would not count out Sullivan at this point in time. I think he's the candidate who's most likely to have the backing of unions in a short race where there's not a lot of other voter interest. The unions can really make the difference in terms of who moves.
Might I quickly add that out of all the candidates, one has been quietly behind the scenes running for this position.
The last 3-4 years.
Unofficially for quite some time, and that's Jeff Stone.
Right.
He's been organized for a long time.
Organized doesn't mean anybody knows him outside of his district.
All right.
Well, the conservatives know he
Let's
is.
talk for just a minute about the Packer game. We tape this on Friday evening, so when it replays on Sunday,
We're all lost.
somebody's going to look like a fool. So let's make a prediction. Can the Packers pull this one out?
Yes, they can pull it out.
I think
Will
Rodgers,
they pull it out?
Rodgers is going to look stunning in that dome.
Well, all the indications point to Atlanta. They're at home. Their quarterback never loses there. This is a team that
13-1 at home.
This is a team that doesn't make mistakes. It takes the ball away. It doesn't commit a lot of turnovers. But having said that, the Packers, I think, benefit from having played last week, and Atlanta had the week off. The Packers are hot and on a roll and playing very good, maybe their best football of the season. I think they can win, but because it's on the road, I give the slight edge to Atlanta.
Yeah, but if that running game gets hurt in like the first play of the game.
Yeah, you know, to me, I think there's one thing that we need to keep an eye out for. If we hear one name, one Falcons defensive player's name a lot, it's not good for the Packers. And that's Brent Grimes, who was the NFL's Defensive Player of the Week, leads the league in knockdowns. So, I mean, I think if we hear his name a lot, that's not good for us. I also think that I agree with you. Aaron Rodgers is great, but the problem is so is Matt Ryan. He's great at home.
He doesn't lose at home.
He doesn't lose at home. His stats are almost identical to Rodgers.
But so was Michael Vick. And until I'm shown that anybody can beat the Packers, I agree they're on a roll.
You shill.
All right. Now we go back to Tucson again and to the discussion that's taken off in Arizona, in Washington, everywhere in between. Rick Horowitz has a few thoughts he'd like to toss into the mix in a very, very civil way, of course. Rick.
Okay, let's stipulate, I want to make this simple, let's stipulate that Sarah Palin had absolutely nothing to do with the shootings in Tucson. Sarah Palin didn't, and neither did Glenn Beck or Sean Hannity or any of the hotheads on talk radio. Let's stipulate that Jared Loughner, the suspect in those shootings, listened to voices in his head, not to voices on Fox News or Facebook. But what about the next guy? That's my question. What about the next guy? What about the next angry young man who emerges from the millions of people who are plugged into those daily denunciations, who are being whipped into a frenzy over, I don't know, the government's latest plot to put us all in shackles and hand the country over to the Stalinist, socialist, terrorist, death panel Muslim Nazis? That guy has a gun too, and a high-capacity clip. When will he decide that it's his turn, his mission to set things right? Can we really pretend that words don't have consequences? Here, do this for me. Imagine that Tucson never happened. Take last weekend and Jared Loughner completely out of the picture. That shopping center, still just a shopping center. The dead and the wounded are alive and whole once again. Do all that, and the political atmosphere 10 days ago, a month ago, 10 months ago, was still totally toxic. The threat of violence was already looming large, long before Gabrielle Giffords became an assassin's target. Already, I wrote this back last March, already there have been bricks thrown through windows and pictures of nooses. Already the authorities have had to increase security for certain government officials whose votes, whose beliefs have displeased the ranters and the thugs and the rest of them. And when the bricks become bullets, I wrote, as they almost surely will, and the death threats turn into conscious acts, just watch the ranters and the thugs pull back in horror or some half-baked simulation of it. We never dreamed, they'll say. We had no idea, they'll insist. That will be a lie. The time to prevent the next shooter, the next storm of bullets, is now. Words have consequences.
Well, thank you, Rick, and thank you so much for watching. Stay warm. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.